All right, you guys, happy Tuesday, and listen up because it's official. Xavier Poussard, the author of Becoming Brigitte, has officially been sued by Brigitte Macron, and it's for cyberbullying. Cyberbullying. Huh? And in the official report that she's filed with the police, I get an honorable mention, so I'm going to tell you all about that. Also, the Trump administration is all over the place right now. They're like, look over here, the MLK files, we're releasing them today. Look over here. Have you guys been following the Brian Kohlberg stabbings in Idaho? Yeah, well, we're demanding answers. Look everywhere. But over there, I don't know, guys, it's starting to feel like they're saying a lot of words to really just come out and say that they want us to move on from Jeffrey Epstein. And here's the thing. No. Just no. So today we continue our series looking into the Epstein files. So look, this is going to be controversial. My podcast is controversial, but I've got to tell you a story, and you are going to want to listen to this. It's a story about a young Hungarian boy. His name is Miklos, okay? Miklos had a bit of misfortune in his life, and I'll be clear, that's putting it lightly, because at just 15 years of age, in the midst of World War II, he and his family were sent into a Polish work camp. I want to be clear, this was in April of 1944, so not long before the end of the war. But he and his family, along with 17,000 other terror-stricken Hungarians, were forcefully made to commute into a camp which would later come to be known as Auschwitz. Miklos was transferred alongside his brother, his mother, his father, and almost as soon as they arrived, he recounts that his mother and his younger brother were separated from him and eventually killed very quickly. He also recounts how he and his father were then made to shave their heads. They were given white tags with numbers that were on them, black numbers that were made out of cloth. Later on, he would tell that from that day forward, he lost his identity. He was no longer Miklos. He became a number. That number was 11104. Like I said, they were made to change into these working clothes, and eventually they had those numbers tattooed upon their skin. Eventually, because of the working conditions, his father just grew too weak. It was just the most insane things that they were made to endure every day physically. And so his father says to his son, look, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to survive the labor of this camp, but I want you to make me a promise. I'm paraphrasing here, but he makes Miklos promise him that if Miklos ever makes it out of the camp, he wants Miklos to commit himself to telling the world the truth regarding what they suffered. What happens next is that his father is then selected to be exterminated because he's no use, he's too weak. And Miklos says that he felt his entire body and his soul were then just worn out from this news. He then goes and he finds two other inmates who had befriended his father throughout this time. And their names were Abraham and Lazar. Abraham and Lazar Wiesel. Abraham had the number 7712 tattooed upon him, and Lazar had the number 7713 tattooed upon him. The two brothers made a promise to Miklos that they would take care of him in his father's absence, and sure enough, his father was then killed. With the three of them, they were now a band of brothers. Months later, they were informed that the Russians had managed to break through, and in January of 1945, the order came in that it was time to leave Auschwitz. Now, those who didn't have the strength to make the journey, which was going to be a very long walk, 30 kilometers in the snow, they would be left to die. They either were going to make that walk or they weren't. Like I said, through snow and through the cold. And then what happens is 30 kilometers later, they're crammed onto trains, and many of them die from various ailments until finally those that survive that long journey arrive at Buchenwald, a different camp. It was there that Miklos is reunited with Lazar, and he learns, unfortunately, that Lazar's brother Abraham did not make the journey. He was not strong enough. Here's what happens next. Days later, they are liberated by U.S. soldiers. Now, Americans listening to this, we know this story. We know the story of a liberation. It is on the fourth day of liberation that American soldiers rush into block number 57, where both Lazar and Miklos are bunked, and the American soldiers take a photo. It would become one of the most famous photos ever captured of Liberation Day. You've probably seen this photo before. After a medical exam, he again loses track of his friend Lazar. Miklos is diagnosed with tuberculosis, and he begins a long road to recovery. He gets treated in Switzerland, and he would later recount how it really took him years to treat the psychological effects, having to adapt to normal behavior again in the world. Fast forward 45 years later, and it's 1986, and a man named Elie Wiesel is awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for his work documenting the atrocities that he survived at Auschwitz. He had told the world that he was one of the inmates in the now famed liberation photo. So Miklos, who is now going by the name Niklaus, like Nicholas, begins receiving all these phone calls from journalists asking if he would like to meet up with his old inmate from Buchenwald, Elie Wiesel. A newspaper editor says, hey, we will even fly you to the Grand Hotel in Sweden for this reunion. We want to capture this reunion. And he's on the phone, and Niklaus he's a bit confused. He's going, Elie Wiesel. The newspaper editor informs him that Elie Lazar Wiesel was due to receive the Nobel Prize and that they would arrange that meeting for him to see his old friend on December 14th at the Grand Hotel. Suddenly, he is overcome with joy. I mean, can you imagine having survived that? You have lost touch. It's now some 40 plus years later. He recounts that he felt joy and he felt honor. 4 days later, his flight is booked and he soon boards that plane to Stockholm, where he recounts that he is thinking deeply on the plane about what's he going to say to this guy? Man, I haven't seen him in so many years. What can I tell Lazar? What can we give one another having survived this unique experience? And then finally, he says the flight went by so quickly, he hardly remembers it. Then finally that moment arrived for them to meet in the Grand Hotel. I'm going to quote him directly now. He writes, quote, after about 10 minutes waiting, the door opened and beyond expectation, in came a man of my own age, heading towards me with a smile on his face saying hello. I returned the smile, but I did not know to whom I was smiling at. The question regarding a handshake was hanging in the air. I made a quick move in reaching out with an attempt to shake hands with him, to say hello to him, and I finished up saying, delighted to see you. He said, Elie. I asked him in half Jewish, he means Yiddish, and half English, what language he would prefer to speak in. Jewish, I said. He replied, no. Then I asked him if Hungarian would suit him better, and he said, I can't speak Hungarian. Okay, I said, then we'll take it in English. And he opened up conveying regards from a rabbi living in Israel who was previously stationed in Sweden. His part of the performance started in front of the cameras, which I would say was professionally carried out. He was a master of his job. He's referring, of course, to Elie. All of a sudden, the reporter and the photographer joined the conversation, asked if we knew one another from before. I said no, and Elie agreed with my statement. Elie then hands him a signed copy of his book, Night. Niklaus Gruner is completely gobsmacked. He soon realizes that he's been set up as a moment of profound propaganda for this stranger who is not Lazar, who he was in the camp with. Anyways, he leaves and he begins reading the book Night, and soon after realizes that that man, Elie, is not only an imposter, but he's also a fraud. He reads the book and is shocked at the stories that he is telling that he says certainly didn't happen while he was there. He writes, quote, I had never seen, referring to Auschwitz, or even come close to ditches burning with open fire where people or children could be seen burning on my way to the washroom in Auschwitz, as written in Night by Elie Wiesel. Neither was it possible for boys of my age and with a weight of only 25 kilos to chase and to rape German women in Weimar, as claimed in Night, after the continual treatment of bromide used to minimize our sexual desires. In Night, Elie Wiesel also recounts how he, a 15-year-old Hungarian boy, threw out his Hungarian passport in front of the guards close to the Polish-Ukrainian border. Niklaus laughed at that part because, as he writes, quote, it would have immediately led to death, especially then if a Hungarian passport was even in the hands of a Jewish boy in Hungary, not to mention that a boy of 15 years was still counted as a child and was therefore entered into his father's passport if he had one. Furthermore, according to my knowledge, a Hungarian passport was protected by law against abuse, and an improper treatment would lead to a very heavy fine. Besides, one had to be at least 23 years old to hold a passport then, end quote. Niklaus then spends the rest of his life dedicated to exposing this fraud, Elie Wiesel, who he claims stole the identity of his friend, eventually culminating into a book by Niklaus entitled Stolen Identity. And he has that number, A7713, where he then reveals throughout his entire life, he then dedicates it to telling the truth. He reveals that Elie doesn't even have a tattoo. Hungarian news would confirm that. Multiple pictures show Elie wearing short sleeves, doesn't have a tattoo, which was required, at least according to Niklaus, for all of the inmates to have. He goes through lawsuits. He's suing the Hungarian government. He starts to believe that there is some conspiracy to try to platform this guy. He sues rabbis for libel. I mean, when I say he dedicates the rest of his life to exposing this Nobel Prize winner as a fraud, that's exactly what he did. And then he says he's not surprised because when Elie Wiesel eventually dies, they bury him very quickly, too quickly. And he says, yeah, they did that because if journalists had been allowed in to see his body, they would have noted that he did not have a tattoo. No, this guy stole the identity of a Holocaust survivor. So who is this Elie Wiesel who allegedly steals this identity? Who steals identities, no less, and then makes up these stories, which, by the way, it is confirmed that he fictionalized stories in his book, Night. Well, as I told you guys before, Elie Wiesel was the cousin of Robert Maxwell. Man, a man of many names, as we told you before. Man of many identities, like we told you before. And therefore, Elie Wiesel becomes a very curious piece of the Epstein story. Now enter Ghislaine Maxwell's mother, because that's how this connects. Again, this is Robert Maxwell's wife. I'm going to tell you about her. She is known as Betty. She was born on March 11th, 1921 in Saint-Alban-de-Roche, in France. Her full name is Elisabeth Jenny Jeanne Maynard, and she comes from wealth. She comes from a Lyon line of silk weaving industrialists, which were founded by her ancestor, a Swiss Calvinist merchant named Samuel de Bar. Now, Elisabeth Maynard would go on in her life to explain how this mixed marriage, obviously, she was a Calvinist Christian and he was a Jew, and how the religious question arose between them as soon as they met. And she says that Robert Maxwell was relieved that she was a Protestant and not a Catholic. She writes that it seemed to have relieved him because on the whole, Protestants were not anti-Semitic, but, the Catholics were. So the story goes that she then commits herself to learning Hebrew, and she really throws herself into Robert Maxwell's ancestry. And of course, therefore, the Holocaust. Now, I should tell you now that Robert Maxwell, it may come as a shock to you, but he was not the only fraud in the Maxwell clan. Because after his exceedingly well-timed death, his wife opted to sit down for a very long, rather dramatic interview with Vanity Fair. And in this, you can see it's entitled The Sinking of Captain Bob. And she kind of gloriously arrives sitting in one of their mansions. I'm going to read directly from this article because I love this. I like to picture her, just very dramatic. The reporter writes, "She was sitting on the edge of a chintz-covered love seat, sipping tea and staring at me over the rim of her cup with her cool, teal blue eyes. We were talking about how the whole of British society seemed to be gloating over the fall of House of Maxwell. Some newspapers reported that Betty Maxwell had closed her Oxford mansion with its soaring stained glass window depicting Maxwell as Samson at the gates of Gaza and absconded to her thatch-roofed chateau near Bergerac in the southwest of France. But in fact, the iron-willed matriarch of the Maxwell family was still living in her adopted land, shuttling from lawyer to lawyer in an effort to unravel the tangled skin of her husband's financial affairs and to salvage whatever she could of her own inheritance. Elsewhere in the interview, she declares, quote, "They say that I have 500,000 pounds. Those are lies. I haven't anything." Oh, really? We're going to fact check that after we take a quick break. Throw it to our sponsors. Foremost, preborn, because I've told you guys before, and I'll say it again, I am pro-life. That means I stand with mothers before their baby is born and long after that, and that's exactly why I partner with Preborn. Preborn is not out to judge women. They're making motherhood possible. They provide free ultrasounds, they share the gospel of Jesus Christ, and most importantly, they stay after the baby is born with real practical support by giving expecting mothers diapers, baby clothes, even housing and financial help for up to 2 years after their baby is born. And because that is what true Christ-centered compassion looks like. Here's how you can be a part of that. With just $28, you will give a mom a free ultrasound, one chance to see her baby. And when she does, she's twice as likely to choose life. Preborn is on a mission to rescue 70,000 babies this year. Don't just say that you're pro-life. You can actually live it if you donate now. Call 855-601-2229, or you can head to preborn.com/Candace. Again, that's preborn.com/Candace. Also reminding you guys about GNO land, because what if smart contract platforms weren't controlled by elites or big tech? What if they were built by and for real builders, the people? That's the question that GNO Land asked, and that's why they built GNO Land. They started with Golang, a language real-world developers that already use, and they built a new platform around it. It's transparent, intuitive, and it just makes sense. Not some confusing system of ones and zeros. It's open source, so you can imagine GitHub, but designed for on-chain collaboration and composability. Builders actually get credit for their work, and they get rewarded every time their code gets used. That's the real value, not likes, not clout, actual reward. So you can visit GNO Land. They rejected proof of stake, which is a system where the rich run the show. They went with proof of authority instead. ADAO, where contributors, not bad actors or Silicon Valley, actually call the shots. GNO Land is open, fair, and honestly pretty unstoppable. So if you're a builder, a freedom lover, or just tired of rigged platforms, please check it out by visiting gno.land/Candace. Again, that's gno.land/Candace. Okay, now we're going to jump back. Betty Maxwell, husband, right as the walls are closing in upon him. They're starting to investigate him. They're realizing, oh my gosh, the pensions are missing. And conveniently timed death. And now they're saying, oh, guys, we just need time to mourn. Oh, I can't believe people think that I knew anything about it, Betty is telling this Vanity Fair reporter. I know nothing about what happens in Liechtenstein. I know nothing. I have nothing. Well, the truth is actually that Betty was not broke. Betty did not have nothing. She was not broke at all. She'll never know a day of her life of what it means to be broke. As Xavier Poussard reveals in his forthcoming book about Epstein, despite the generally accepted story that after insurers refused to pay out the life insurance for her husband because it was assumed he had committed suicide, Elisabeth wrote a book called Tout soleil est amer, which means all the sun is bitter, about her chaotic family life. She also recounts how Ghislaine Maxwell, her daughter, had been treated for anorexia, like a laboratory rat, etc., all these stories. And it was told that those book sales allowed the family to survive. But the truth, as revealed in part by the Financial Times in 1992, is that she also inherited 3 apartments in France. It's also revealed years later that the will forgot to include the part where multiple properties were given to her, as well as hectares of land and forests, actually, that Robert Maxwell had acquired in his wife's name before he disappeared or committed suicide or whatever we're supposed to believe. And beyond that, it would be discovered that a financial war chest had been sheltered away for her with the complicity of the Labour member of Parliament, a guy named Jeffrey Robinson. If you're in the UK, you might be familiar with that name because he was the former boss of Jaguar. Yes, like the car. He was also an ex-Soviet agent. He would then go on to become the future paymaster general under Prime Minister Tony Blair, very corrupt prime minister, and the Peter Mandelson, that duo. Anyways, the point is that she was far from financially ruined. So this was a performance. She was wealthy from the day she was born up until the day that she met Robert Maxwell through to the day that she died. And while she lived, I should tell you now, going back to his cousin, Elie Wiesel, she sort of rather obsessed herself with documenting the horrors of the Holocaust. In fact, according to Xavier Poussard and various other sources, it was under pressure from Betty that Robert Maxwell, while he was robbing the UK hardworking people of their pensions, he commissioned Churchill's meticulous biographer, a guy named Martin Gilbert, a professor at Harvard, to draw up an atlas of the Holocaust, which was then published by Pergamon Press in 1988. Remember, Pergamon Press, as we know, was a deep state operation. They sent Robert Maxwell into Germany. He acquires this magazine, renames it the Pergamon Press. And yeah, so suddenly they're publishing an atlas of the Holocaust in 1988, specifically all the places and all the original figures of the persecution. She also worked with Yad Vashem in Jerusalem to produce a white book of documents pertaining to the Holocaust, again published by Pergamon Press, 1988. In 1987, she then found the Journal for the Holocaust and Genocide Studies, first published by the Pergamon Press and then later on by Oxford University Press. And the year following that in London and in Oxford, she organizes a conference entitled Remembering for the Future, a world conference with the support, of course, of Robert Maxwell and the enormous resources provided by his media empire, and also, of course, with the support and alongside Elie Wiesel and others. It was a symposium that was intended to force the Lambeth Conference, which is the official meeting of the Anglican Church, to repent. She actually wrote this. This was published in a left-leaning publication. She wrote, quote, "Christians, through their churches and the whole of Christendom, are co-responsible for the Holocaust. I want the studies carried out in the world on the church to be made public. It is a matter of addressing Christians. The problem of the Holocaust is a Christian problem." She also stated that, quote, "Christian teaching, which teaches contempt, has been responsible for anti-Semitism for 2,000 years, and Christians still have not understood it." Yeah, that statement was published in Liberation, again, a left-leaning newspaper in France on April 20th, 1988. And she also clarified that, quote, "The first step for Christians is to recognize their guilt and to ask Jews for forgiveness." Okay. Anyways, in 1995, she then gets invited to be the Grand Marshal of the Salute to Israel parade. She leads the procession of the largest demonstration of support for Israel, which is held annually, by the way, on Fifth Avenue in New York. She's then appointed to become the vice president of the International Council of Christians and Jews. A lot of that going around, these Christian and Jews collaborations. And yeah, that's just amazing stuff, you guys. What are we to make of all of this? We got Robert Maxwell over there robbing pension funds to support Israel, something that we know Epstein is also doing in America. They're lying. There's so many names that are being changed. We now know that his cousin, Elie, is making up things about what happened at Auschwitz. And for some reason, he doesn't want to show his number that was supposed to be tattooed. Later on, this brave guy who's taking him to task, going through courts to establish that this man was a fraud, discovers that he stole a manuscript that was written in Yiddish. He learns that Elie doesn't even speak Yiddish. Who claims that he was Hungarian, born in Romania, had a Hungarian passport, doesn't even speak Hungarian. What's going on, guys? Now we know that with him, they're establishing educational books related to the Holocaust. And speaking of education, this might be a good time to tell you that Robert Maxwell was very interested in the education of upcoming Americans, people like myself. In fact, the year that I was born, in 1989, Robert Maxwell's company, Maxwell Communication Corporation, formed a joint venture with McGraw-Hill. Now, Americans know McGraw-Hill, right? They published all of our textbooks growing up. McGraw-Hill would create the second largest textbook publishing in the United States, publishing agency in the United States. Yeah, they did this with Robert Maxwell. Of course, after he then died and the family was then thrust into scandal, McGraw dropped him as their partner. But what was the intention of that partnership? What's this guy who we know is working for MI6 and making this sort of fake publishing empire, Midas touch, pull through? What was the intention of that partnership to publish textbooks to teach Americans what exactly? It's very interesting, right? And by the way, we're talking about the deep state and their interest in publishing and purchasing all these magazines and educating us. They weren't the only people that were interested in having a stake in the education of American minds. Because remember Donald Barr? I keep bringing this guy up. Incredible guy. He wrote that fantasy series predicting Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein and human trafficking, space relations by Donald Barr, member of the OSS, which would come on to become the CIA, right? His son, William Barr, who says, nothing to see here. Jeffrey Epstein's dead. Just, prison just wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing that day, and that's how he ended up dead. Yeah, well, Donald Barr also was interested in educational books. He published educational books as well. Just fascinating to consider. Educational books pertaining to our evolution, where we come from, the primitive man, kind of the start of we were monkeys and Australopithecus, and describing science for children, atomic energy for children. It's all connected somehow. Their interest in science and republishing science and teaching us what is real and what is fake. Anyways, now it is quite a weird thing. We all have to admit that a family of survivors of the Holocaust, allegedly, as the Maxwells were, would commit themselves to causes that were then meant to control birth. It's weird that the Maxwells would want anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein, no, because he was openly a eugenicist. In 2019, it was revealed that Epstein had planned to, quote, seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating up to 20 women at a time, using his New Mexican compound as a baby ranch. And also, one of Ghislaine's siblings would marry into the family that created the contraceptive pill. Really? All seems, I don't know, like a conflict of interest for Holocaust survivors. I don't know. I digress. I'm not here to form conclusions. I'm just here to tell you the story. And that's probably a good place for us to stop until we pick up things again tomorrow, because a lot of things are coming together and I'm having a lot of questions that I will maybe reserve for the book club tonight. Anyways, you guys, speaking of France and switching gears here to some breaking news, Xavier Poussard, who is also documenting, obviously, this series with Epstein and has been very good at revealing that there's a lot of perversion at the top of the French government. The biggest thing being that the first lady is a dude, right? And like a lot of pedophilia keeps happening. And yeah, she maybe fell for a 14-year-old. That's kind of problematic. Well, guess what? I told you that despite him having to pick up and move his family to Italy, he had received summons to the Italian police station telling him that they had some documents for him. Well, guess what? He got served. Yep, Brigitte Macron. This is a tweet from him. He wrote, breaking news. Brigitte Macron sues Xavier Poussard for cyber harassment. He goes on to read that summoned on the 21st of July, 2025 to the Milan office of Division of Investigations, General Investigations, and Special Operations, which is the special police in Italy. The author of Becoming Brigitte was told that he would be questioned soon following a complaint by Brigitte Macron for cyber harassment. In the minutes of this complaint, which we have been able to look up, Brigitte Macron tells the commissioner who exceptionally came to the Élysée Palace, I Quote, I don't go on a trip abroad without hearing about it. There isn't a spouse of the head of a state who is not aware of the rumor about her trans identity. Anyways, he goes on to recount that he is, in fact, being sued for cyber harassment. They were able to get the documents of that person who went to the Élysée Palace to question her about how she was enduring this cyber harassment because, like we told you, they're now switching gears. They know they can't win a lawsuit on libel because it's the truth, and the truth is a defense, and they're putting themselves at risk because in order to prove that it's libel, you have to prove that it's untrue, and they can't do that. They cannot do that. So instead, she's switching gears, and she's going after journalists for cyber bullying, cyber harassment, laws which they have in France, which we don't have here in America. I don't think that she's going to be able to come after me for cyber harassment, but she is trying, and she says this. When that commissioner arrived at the Élysée Palace on page 3 out of 4, you can see here, they're transcribing in English. They ask her, have you ever heard of Candace Owens? And Brigitte says, yes, of course. And my counsel in the United States, Mr. Clare, has initiated proceedings against him, not Brigitte calling me a him, to demand an apology and public correction or retractions. Otherwise, the proceedings will continue. Yeah, that's not happening ever. And I have been kind of asking for you to continue those proceedings because it would be pretty interesting. Like I said, you can't just be suing people down in Tennessee for cyber harassment, for reporting on the truth. I know that you guys have amassed a lot of power in France, which seems to be home. A lot of this grotesque perversion that is happening in the world. Epstein's living there. Maxwells are living there. Everyone's got a home there. They know that they can always have a home there or in Israel. It's getting pretty interesting. It's getting pretty spicy. We'll see if she comes after me, but obviously we're going to continue to report on what's happening to Xavier Poussard. Now, my best guess is it's also the reason that they won't stop is, like I said, it's all tied together. The story of the Maxwells, the story of the Epsteins, the story of Brigitte Macron and what is going on in France. And this man has been documenting it for years. So they are throwing the kitchen sink at him. We got to get him some way, somehow, at least distracted so he's not reporting, so people don't begin to understand what exactly has taken place in this world. It is indeed, what all I can say is it's a lot of drama. And speaking of drama, there is a drama playing out on Capitol Hill right now because of pressure. We have Attorney General Pam Bondi saying she's agreed to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah, here's the headline coming out of NBC News. Deputy Attorney General will meet with Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. And she says, if there's more to figure out here, we're going to see if we can get to the bottom of it. This is all fake, and you should not accept this. The moment that she should have just gone away and we could stop listening to Pam Bondi is the moment when she actually said that she was not sure whether or not Epstein could have been working for another country. Despite the fact that we have testimony in the form of Viktor Ostrovsky, who we covered. He defected from the Mossad, wrote a book, gave many speeches, speaking about exactly how he worked with Jeffrey Epstein, what his capacity was. The Mossad has confirmed that Viktor Ostrovsky is not a fraud. He used to work for them, okay? So yeah, you got some evidence there. Also, Ari Ben-Menashe saying that, Epstein was brought to us. He was supposed to involve him in weapons dealing, the Iran-Contra affair. You know this, Pam Bondi, because the public knows this. So if you're playing stupid, it means that you are now a part of the swamp. You're part of the deep state. You are covering things up. And they're trying even more distractions, releasing the MLK files. Oh, we're going to now look into, here's everything. Here's a trove, tens of thousands of documents pertaining to the assassination of MLK, as if we don't already know that the feds shot him. Meant to be a distraction. I actually love that MLK's daughter, Bernice King, tweeted this. Check this out. Now do the Epstein files. No one is being distracted, you guys. We all recognize what exactly is happening, and it's a good thing. Stay focused on this because, like I said, this is the thread. This is the undoing. Everybody's going to wake up very quickly to the tapestry of deception that has been very carefully woven. Especially my generation, the people that just, I would say, were baptized in the liturgy of World War II. now beginning to ask some very important questions which demand answers. And guess what? We're not really feeling dissuaded by you crying and saying that we're not allowed to ask these questions. Actually, I would say it's almost further committing us to the cause. What the hell happened? How much have we been lied about and for how long? And what is this unique, strange, disgusting, perverse relationship that we seem to have with Israel? Anyways, you guys, throwing it to a couple more of our sponsors before I get into some of your comments today. Field of Greens, because one simple lifestyle upgrade that we can all make is choosing Field of Greens. If you enjoy a delicious glass of doctor-formulated Field Greens each day, you'll feel amazing. Plus, your doctor will notice your improved health or they will give you your money back. One Field of Greens customers wrote in saying that, quote, the best blood work I've had in a decade. My doctor said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Another said, quote, for the first time in years, my cholesterol numbers are normal. If you're wondering how a fruit and veggie drink promises better health, well, each fruit and vegetable in the Field of Greens was doctor selected to support vital organs like heart, liver, kidneys, metabolism, immune system, and healthy blood cells. I can get you started today with a 20% off your order and free shipping if you visit fieldofgreens.com and use code Candace. Again, that's fieldofgreens.com. Use code Candace. Also remind you guys about American financing because costs are still very much on the rise for everything, gas, groceries, home repairs. If you're a homeowner, you probably have thought, should I call American Financing to refinance and pay off this credit card debt? Then you maybe second-guessed yourself because you're enjoying a low mortgage rate. But look, that low rate means absolutely nothing if you are drowning in credit card interest rates of 25% or more. That's the math that most people do not want to face, but it would be costing you thousands. Here's the truth. If you're only making minimum payments, the debt is going to follow you for years. That's why people are calling American Financing because they're saving customers an average of $800 a month by using their equity to finally break free from credit card debt. You owe it to your family to see what's possible. There are no upfront fees. There's no pressure. It will cost you nothing to find out what you could be saving every single month. And if you start today, you may be able to delay 2 mortgage payments. So do not wait any longer. Call American Financing today. The number is 800-795-1210. Again, 800-795-1210 or visit americanfinancing.net/Owens. Again, americanfinancing.net/Owens. All right, you guys, let's see what is on your mind today. A lot of stuff that we have just uncovered. Very interesting stuff. Marzi writes, did you hear about the guy who threatened to unalive people on the Epstein client list? He's being prosecuted by the DOJ, and I thought that was weird because there is no list. Yeah, I actually did hear about this. And then he said, oh, wait, it's illegal to threaten politicians in the U.S. Yeah, I have heard about this. Here's the ABC article relating to that. But yeah, a Florida man made death threats against people who he said were on the list. And so they've arrested him. And people are saying, hey, there is no list. So who exactly did he threaten? It is interesting. They are kind of twisting themselves into a pretzel, having to explain everything. Also, Zach Royden writes, love your work, Candace. In your interview with E. Michael Jones, he said Protestantism comes from Satanism. I attend a Protestant church. I don't fully align with either side. What's your view on gospel-believing Protestants? So obviously, you guys know I can't judge because I was a Protestant not too long ago. And what I would say is I very much accept now on the other side of this thing that the more that you study history, you move very quickly away from Protestantism because you start to notice that it has always been hijacked as a political movement. And I hope that in watching this podcast series, as we cover a lot of these topics, that you'll start to realize how exactly Protestantism was hijacked for political sake. As certainly while we are covering the topic of Israel and we are seeing all of these churches and these ministers get on stage and don't listen to Tucker Candace and Tucker and Candace Owens, whatever I'm being called out there, you go, okay, what is that? That obviously what has gone on here. And then there's like some common sense questions that I think like came online for me where I was just like, okay, there's so many different Protestant divisions. Clearly they can't all be correct, right? They can't all be correct. And it just seems to be splitting further and further and further. And the more something becomes divided, I would say the more evil it becomes, right? We should be aspiring to holiness, holy, things that are whole. So there's a lot there. Regarding E. Michael Jones, that sit down that we had talking about pornography, we are going to drop that onto Spotify on Friday. It's a very important conversation that we've had. E. Michael Jones Oh, we already uploaded it. Sorry, I'm late. Was that last Friday? It is on Spotify already. If you go to last Friday's episode, E. Michael Jones is on the ADL's list. So I like him immediately because of that. I feel like we actually should be using that list maybe almost as a guide to people that we should be listening to at this point, since the ADL is just known to lie and smear. And that's what they exist for. They exist to defame people. Rose K writes, Candace, I support Trump on many policies, but he is wrong and lost my support on the Epstein files. Children should always be protected. Christ is king today, tomorrow, and forever. May God bless you in your journey for bringing truth to all. I totally agree with you. I think he's lost a lot of people. Like I said yesterday, I think he's lost complete control of his movement. And now the field is wide open for 2028. I feel that basically getting the kiss from Trump in 2028 is not going to mean what it should mean, right? If Trump's like, you should totally vote for this person, I think people are going to go, I can't trust that anymore. That's not going to be good. That's going to be a figurative kiss of death, because all of us are feeling that this is just crazy. The amount of gaslighting, the lies, making us chase our tails, trying to make us chase our tails. We're going to open up the grand jury indictment, like they said yesterday. That means nothing. That means absolutely nothing. And he knows it means nothing. So what actually gives? What is Trump on right now? I agree with you. Luke Hasley writes, we do not have cyberbullying laws in the U.S. yet, but I remember that Melania Trump was working on a cyberbullying platform in Trump's first term. Yes, she was. I don't think anything ever came of it. I don't think, she definitely, I don't believe, was trying to pass cyberbullying laws. And so we are still marked safe from that. Although you could say, quite close happening on college campuses with these like speech laws, whether they were doing it for BLM or they're doing it now for Israel. That is always something to pay attention to. Will Wallace writes, Pam Blondie, we know you're watching. If there's nothing to be seen, then prove it. Release the nothing files. Yes, release the nothing files. We would like those nothing files. You're not protecting us. Oh, it's way too sinister for you guys to see. We can handle it. Please. We know that's not the reason that you guys are locking things down. Crikey writes, Candace, do you believe that Bondi will hide info or suppress info if she does interview Maxwell? Yeah, I think all of them are bad faith actors. I trust nothing out of Ghislaine Maxwell's mouth, given the history of her family, the extraordinary history of her family. And yeah, I think all of it, like I said, is just one big show. Like they are all putting on a performance right now. They will do the absolute most to get us to just stop talking about it, which is why we should not stop talking about it. Brandon Hamill writes, hey, Candace, I'm a fellow Connecticut resident, lived in Stamford my whole life and went to West Hill High School, one of the worst experiences of my life. But I love you so much. Keep doing you. Shout out to all the Stamford residents. I was Stamford High, Black Knights. So yeah, West Hill, you guys were the enemy. So the orange and the black versus the purple and yellow, purple and gold, I think you guys were. But thank you so much for supporting. I haven't been back in a really long time. It's just hard to fly into Connecticut. That's what the issue is. Anyways, you guys, what we have following this is book club tonight. So if you've joined, we can go deeper on this topic of Epstein. It feels like a lot of the dots keep connecting, especially as we finish wrapping Hollywood Babylon. If you guys have not yet subscribed, this is going to be the last day that we cover Hollywood Babylon, and we're just kind of going to be recounting everything that we've learned in this book as we then jump into our next book, The Assault on Truth. This is the perfect time to join. You can head to CandaceOwens.com to join the book club. If you're a parent, also, you can sign up to CandaceOwens.com and look at the Shot in the Dark series. I think it's so important for every parent to watch that series when you have a child, so you are steeled against the doctors who are lying about everything, in my view, when it comes to vaccines, at least obscuring the history of vaccines, so that parents are arbitrarily fearful of diseases coming back. And that series is definitely essential. We are now moving into the birth control series. And that is something. The history of birth control is dark and it is demonic, which is exactly why, by the way, the Maxwell family is married into the contraceptive family, or was. I think they end up getting divorced, but we'll cover that in the future. Anyways, you guys, we will see you tomorrow. Oh, All right, you guys, happy Thursday. And I should ask the question, where are my fellow weaklings at? Because that's what Trump called us yesterday, right? He also, during a press conference, said that we were stupid for still caring about the Epstein files. So I think now we're arriving at the important question here, which is, who is Trump protecting? Because he's clearly protecting someone. Is it himself? Is it someone in his family? We should explore that as we continue to notice patterns. Welcome back to the Epstein files. So the Epstein files are triggering a worldwide response because, well, as you saw yesterday, too many countries are indicated. I'm talking in just yesterday's episode, we already covered Ukraine, Iran, Lebanon, the United States, France, Russia, and we are barely even scratching the surface, my friends. In fact, I didn't even mention yesterday that the country Liechtenstein, a tiny little dot in Europe, that was the country that Robert Maxwell was laundering his money through. So like when he was robbing the pensions, it was going through Liechtenstein and then to Israel. Everybody is involved in this. We're going to get into North Africa. By the way, another random fun fact that I didn't include in yesterday's episode. Guess which law firm represented Robert Maxwell? This is per Vanity Fair's 1992. They did this long profile regarding the mystery of Robert Maxwell's death. Check this out. It tells us in this article that Wilkie, Farr, and Gallagher, if that name is sounding familiar to you, that law firm is sounding familiar to you, it's because they are currently the law firm that is representing Blake Lively. Yeah, the article tells us that they represented Robert Maxwell. And yeah, they're now representing Ryan Reynolds in what the public is noticing might be a totally rigged game against Justin Baldoni. Does Israel have the courts? Who would have the power to rig something that's so obviously wrong, what's been happening in that case? Anyways, point that I'm making here is the world is a stage, my friends. It is a stage. And we should take a listen, by the way. President Trump yesterday explaining to the press who were asking him questions about the Epstein files. He then said this regarding the quote-unquote hoax. Take a listen.
I know you want to move past all this intrigue over the Epstein files, but I do want to ask you to clarify something you said this morning. You said this was all a hoax. Has your attorney
It's a
general
big hoax.
told you this was a hoax? What evidence?
No, it's not the Attorney General. No, I know it's a hoax. It's started by Democrats. It's been run by the Democrats for 4 years. You had Christopher Wray and these characters and Comey before him. And it's a bad group. It started, actually, look at the Steele dossier. That turned out to be a total hoax. The 51 agents, the intelligence, so-called intelligence agents, it was a hoax. It's all been a big hoax. It's perpetrated by the Democrats. And some stupid Republicans and foolish Republicans fall into the net. And so they try and do the Democrats' work.
Look, I'm happy to be stupid. I'm happy to be foolish. I was very happy to be a person in the basket of the deplorables. The ad hominem stuff doesn't mean anything to me, especially when it comes to a ring that involves harming children. Okay? I just think that this is so ridiculous to try to divide people and make it seem like it's a fight between the left and the right. It's not that. We are, in fact, not stupid, but we're happy to have you call those names. And when I hear him say that, it just inspires me more to look into this. I really think that nothing should commit us further to wanting to unpack the Epstein story than the amount of gaslighting that is currently taking place. So let's jump right back into it. We're going to unpack Epstein's story first because I want to keep us very focused. There's going to be so many names, so many things that are happening. By the end of this series, we're going to be speaking about Greek mythology, truly. And I want to make sure that we very early on establish some threads and some trends that you will see as we begin to weave this web, okay? Here are the indicators thus far. Identity laundering. That's a big piece of this. The ability for people to change their names and to go by different names, that we are seeing that already early in this story as we unpacked Robert Maxwell. You can keep this up, the slide up. The next is the Midas touch, okay? The Midas touch being this person was not qualified and yet they were touched. Somebody had their hand on them and they were pulled through the ranks. The third one, obviously, is sexual deviancy. Robert Maxwell, we've talked about him already. An element of theater. You could also say that's a part two that goes along with the identity laundering. They're becoming different people with different stories. It's very gypsy, okay? And the last piece of this is historical revisionism. telling us not to remember what happened yesterday, rewriting. This is when publications get involved, constantly changing somebody's name, helping them, and telling us, don't remember what happened yesterday. This is what we're telling you the present is now. So we've already discussed Epstein's bizarre life story, but we're going to do it again here because now we are in the series officially. And as you know, the indicators, which we've identified in the Robert Maxwell story, are plenty here in the Epstein story as well. His story begins in 1953. And don't worry, I've created a timeline for you guys at home. I know some of you guys like to freeze and go through the timelines. It was in 1953 that Jeffrey Epstein is born. We are told that Jeffrey Epstein spent his childhood in Brooklyn, a part of the Seagate neighborhood, which has a population that is 80% Orthodox Jews of Russian origin. Okay, so they're coming in and they're settling in Brooklyn. That's going to be relevant for later in this episode, so I want to remember that. And similarly, we heard about this when we discussed Robert Maxwell yesterday. His parents were Seymour Epstein, who was a city parks department employee, and Pauline Epstein, who was a school aide. We're told that he was the product of middle-class New York City. That's the same story we're told all the time. All of these refugees didn't have much, and then they're just all going to become very wealthy in a very short amount of time. Millions and sometimes billions. We know that he attended local public schools before he entered Lafayette High School, which is in South Central Brooklyn. That is, in fact, a photo of Jeffrey Epstein that we have here on the screen. Somebody had included this and said, Epstein signed my dad's high school yearbook and wrote "Be Cool" in his yearbook. So that is Jeffrey Epstein. And then we are told that he reportedly graduated several years early. Okay. I don't know how early. Was he a freshman and then they just took him out? But we do know that he next appears in 1969. Jeffrey Epstein enters the prestigious Cooper Union College. But then suddenly and inexplicably, he drops out. Just drops out. Then he enrolls again in 1971 in the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences at NYU. And he is there in 1971 to study the mathematical aspects of cardiac physiology. That's very specific. But guess what? He doesn't make it to the end because he drops out. He drops out of the Courant Institute. Again, we're not given a reason why. It's inexplicable. What we do know is that in 1973, Donald Barr, who we've discussed, he was then the head of the prestigious Dalton School, publishes this mysterious book, Space Relations. We talked about this. And this book is foretelling about a sexual blackmail ring, children that are going to be molested, all to serve this demonic space colony known as KOSSAR, K-O-S-S-A-R, guys, not to be confused with Khazars, okay? They're involved in sex trafficking, and for whatever reason, it's this really disgusting book that the head of a school decided to publish in 1974, not creepy at all, and it foretells the story of Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, what I didn't tell you before is that it should be mentioned that Donald Barr was a member at that time of the Office of Strategic Services in America, the OSS was what became the CIA. It's the predecessor of the CIA, okay? So you've got this guy who is an agent for the government who's publishing this book foretelling of a sex trafficking ring, a powerful colony that believes that it sits above everybody else. And yeah, then what happens? I'm also going to note for you that Donald Barr, because we've got one element of this, is like changing identities. And one way you can change your identity is to just be baptized into a church. That's something that my research has made me understand. A lot of baptism, name changes. Donald Barr also was raised, he was Jewish parents, and then he decides to convert to Catholicism. So he converted to Catholicism, but he is ethnically, he is Jewish. And so would therefore his son, William Barr, be as well. Of course, it's relevant to the story as we are warming up on learning about the Mossad and Israel. Now let's get back into Epstein's timeline. 1974, it's a few months after dropping out of the Courant Institute. Inexplicably, Epstein's then hired at that Dalton school where our government guy got weird fantasies and books that he's publishing, is heading up the school. And why is Epstein hired? Well, he's hired to teach mathematics and physics, despite not having a degree in either. Prestigious school, $50,000 a year. By 1976, Epstein is dismissed from teaching at the Dalton School. Parents were complaining about the weakness of his teaching. It also was alleged by the students that went there. NPR did a long article that he was often in the company of young girls, that he's taught outside of the school. And this is a blurb from a New York Times piece. 8 former students who attended the prestigious school during Mr. Epstein's short tenure there said that his conduct with teenage girls had left an impression that had lingered for decades. One former student recalled him showing up at a party where students were drinking, while most remembered his persistent attention on the girls in hallways and classrooms. She said, "I can remember thinking at the time that this is wrong." That is a quote from Scott Spicer, who graduated from Dalton in 1976. Well, no matter, because, then he left. And in 1978, the legend goes, kind of hand of Midas, touch of Midasing all of this. Legend goes that through a connection at the school, he was tutoring someone's kid, and then he somehow gets into the situation where he meets the CEO of Bear Stearns. That CEO is Alan Greenberg, who then decides to make him a junior assistant on the trade floor, because he obviously knows nothing about finance. I don't even know if there's anything about math or science either. But within just 4 years, he rises through the ranks and becomes a partner. He is a limited partner at Bear Stearns. What? Don't worry, guys. By 1981, he departs Bear Stearns, and I'll tell you why. Some employees, by the way, say that he was fired, but Jeffrey Epstein has always maintained that he resigned out of his own free will after a relatively minor violation with the SEC that resulted in a relatively minor fine of $2,500. That's his story, and he's sticking to it, or he was sticking to it, or he is sticking to it. Who knows if he's alive? But curiously enough, his departure coincided with the opening, the very day that Jeffrey Epstein left. The SEC was actually opening a procedure to look into insider trading that they alleged had occurred in the context of a corporate takeover bid that was being led by Edgar Bronfman Sr., who was the head of Seagram's. Now, if that name's sounding familiar to you, Edgar Bronfman Sr., because yesterday I told you not to forget this name. I told you to remember the name Edgar Bronfman Sr. because he was the guy that was working at this time with Robert Maxwell, because he was also heading up the World Jewish Conference, and he was working with Robert Maxwell on the refusnik crisis. Essentially, we want Russian Jews to come settle into Israel. The Russian government says, no, you can't do that. Why would we just grant visas for everybody to travel to Israel? I want to be clear. In this very year, in 1981, that is when Edgar Bronfman becomes the president of the World Jewish Conference and focuses on that project to lobby Russia to grant visas to Russian Jews to depart to Israel. And you have to ask yourself, now we know at that same time he's working with Jeffrey Epstein, and the SEC's looking in going, wait, I think some insider trading just happened here. You have to wonder what suddenly then convinces the Russians to allow that to take place. Or what convinced, by the way, the Russian Jews, for that matter, to want to abandon their homeland to move to the Middle East. Was there an incentive provided? Was there a financial incentive provided? I'm just asking questions. Was Robert Maxwell the only Israel firster hotshot that was committing financial crimes to help Israel? Because remember, he's robbing pensions. What's going on over here with these banks that are getting into trouble? I will note now that per a 2003 Vanity Fair article, the SEC never officially brought the proceedings against Bear Stearns for insider trading, but its questions seem to indicate that it was remarkably skeptical. The SEC body was remarkably skeptical of Epstein's answers. Vanity Fair writes that some sources wondered why, if he had such an important role at Bear Stearns, he's a partner, why would he have left over just a small fine of $2,500? Something else was clearly going on there. Now, next part of Epstein's biography gets a little bit murky, And I want to tell you, by the way, what he was interested in. That's kind of like, what was his public life profile? You know, he had all of this money. We don't really know how he has it or how he gets it, but he's everywhere. And I'll tell you some things that he was passionate about. He's a passionate guy. He was passionate about issues relating to human consciousness, brain function, and also particularly transhumanism. Gosh, this is really becoming a theme, transhumanism. He had spoken about how he planned to freeze his body to be reanimated in the future when science allowed it. And he envisioned the insemination of dozens of women with his sperm in order to, quote, strengthen the genetic heritage of the earth. Now, I'm just going to park right here and just say that if that sounded like I could have been reading ideas from Elon Musk. That is something that he talks about a lot. He's interested in human consciousness. He's kind of doing this. And I have always maintained that there's something weird about Elon Musk's background. It gives me the Midas touch. It just doesn't. When I watch him speak, I just don't buy it. But parking aside, these were Epstein's ideas, not Elon Musk. They just would have been kind of the same. And that's what he wanted to do, this just to strengthen the genetic heritage of Earth, to inseminate dozens of women with his sperm. And he supported, therefore, germinal choice, which is a sperm bank of Nobel laureates. Okay? Jeffrey Epstein also, in this capacity, gave, of course, tens of millions of dollars in donations to Harvard. I say, of course, because as we have learned, Harvard is running some sort of a Mossad operation. I feel very confident to state that it's very clear to me and that you are seeing all of these people that are going through Harvard, mysteriously getting in, not very bright people, and suddenly put into positions of power. So I think that is a fair thing to surmise. I'll say it's my opinion. Better be careful because Harvard's coming down on speech at the moment. Now, he then made, Jeffrey Epstein, some curious donations, given the fact that he does not have any children. He donated $25,000 to a children's tennis club in Maryland. He donated $30,000 to a preschool in New York. He donated $15,000 to a private girls' school that is a stone's throw away from his New York mansion. In 2017, he made another $50,000 donation, this time to the UJA, which is the Federation of Jewish Philanthropies of New York, and they are openly committed to world governance. They are openly committed to establishing this one world government. Epstein also gave to a ton of politicians. I'll give you some of them right here. Some interesting names on this list. You can look through this. But yeah, President George H.W. Bush definitely stands out. Former Secretary of State John Kerry stands out. I know the Clintons are on the list as well. Governor John Kasich is on this list. Senator Chuck Schumer is on this list. It is quite telling. He primarily gave to Democrats, but it is quite telling which Republicans he decided to give to. Former Senator Bob Dole. It's definitely something that I think deserves, somebody should definitely prod that narrative and see what motivated him to give to these people, especially in states that he didn't live in. Now, jumping back into our timeline, 1981, this is this big year, right? You've got him with Edgar Bronfman. Edward Bronfman is working factually with Robert Maxwell, and that was also the year 1981 that began the Iran-Contra affair that we discussed yesterday. The Iran-Contra affair is what connects Epstein to Robert Maxwell, not just via Edgar Bronfman, but also through the Refusenik scandal, but also, as Ari Ben-Menashe told us, the insistence at that time was coming from Robert Maxwell in his office in London, telling them that they needed to just let Epstein into the arms discussion, right? Let Epstein into this, include him. Your bosses have told you this guy is good, and now you've got to include him on these arms deals. And Ari Ben-Menashe was like, even though we were instructed to, we thought he was an idiot, we thought he was incompetent, and so we did not involve him. But yes, he ended up getting together a nice little business of blackmailing American politicians. Okay. What happens in 1987 then is kind of relevant because it is, rather appropriately, a British defense contractor. His name was Douglas Leese, okay? So someone who contracts weapons and technology to a nation's military. It was him, Douglas, who recommended Jeffrey Epstein as a genius with no morals to Stephen Hoffenberg. Stephen Hoffenberg was the CEO of a financial company called Towers Financial Corporation. Okay. So we should just acknowledge right now, make it clear that before we get into what happens with Towers Financial Corporation, what Ari Minaj told us is obviously true. I'm just trying to help out this administration, by the way, because they're saying they don't know whether or not Jeffrey Epstein was tied to another government. They have no idea if he was working for another government's secret service. They have no idea if he had ties to intelligence services elsewhere. This is the answer. If I can do this from my house, I feel like maybe the feds could do this. Maybe start with Ari Minaj, who's on record saying that. Maybe start with these other people who are telling you how they're connected. Start with Bronfman, look into that whole thing. I'm just trying to help out the United States government here. Anyways, this confirms that what Ari Minaj said was true, that Robert Maxwell got Jeffrey Epstein involved in weapons. And Vicky Ward, by the way, who is a journalist, reported also that Epstein had operated on behalf of the Saudi arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi. Now, if you're remembering the whole Khashoggi thing, you're like, oh, I remember that name, Jamal Khashoggi. It was like the quote unquote journalist that did not, brutally was murdered. He was a quote unquote, just a Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi. No, he was not. He was not just a Washington Post columnist. His uncle, Adnan, and this is according to the U.S. Defense Intelligence Report, was cited as one of the largest drug exporters from Colombia in the 1980s and the 1990s. And also Viktor Ostrovsky, we mentioned him yesterday. He is the guy that defected from the Mossad. He also claimed in his book that Adnan's loyalty, however, was not to Saudi Arabia, but was actually to the Mossad. He was apparently a long-time recruit of the Israeli Secret Service. Okay. So it is very clear that Jeffrey Epstein was working with, for, and around the Mossad. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense to pretend that he wasn't. Maybe this also explains why he had a Saudi passport. Again, if we're able to figure this out from home, do we really think that Trump and the administration and Pam Bondi with all the files before them can't do that as well? Anyways, back to Tower Financial Corporation. Jeffrey Epstein's now there. A defense contractor recommends that he gets that position. And what happens is that it becomes one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in United States history. The biggest until Bernie Madoff would come years later. So Stephen Hoffenberg, the CEO, who at the time when this Ponzi scheme was going down, ended up going to prison for crimes related to their schemes and the bank's eventual collapse because of it. It's a Ponzi scheme. There's a massive collapse, right? He claimed that while at the bank, it was actually Epstein. It was Epstein that, quote, was very heavily involved in the illegal side of the company, from money laundering to espionage to arms trafficking. Most of this work was criminal. After that, Epstein was able to finance his criminal enterprise, the financial trust company, and J. Epstein and Company. There was another one, I think it was called International Asset Collections. He was able to finance all of that with the assets and money from the Towers financial crimes, end quote. So yeah, but Jeffrey Epstein, regarding Towers going down, the Ponzi scheme, Jeffrey Epstein did not go down with them, because in 1993, Jeffrey Epstein left the Towers Financial Bank just before its collapse. So yeah, while Stephen Hoffenberg then spent 18 years in prison as the mastermind of the Towers Financial Corporation fraud, he actually claimed that it was Epstein who was the mastermind. He actually tried unsuccessfully to sue Epstein 3 times after he was released from prison in 2013. He said Jeffrey Epstein was the true architect, and Jeffrey Epstein had manipulated him. I got to tell you, I tend to believe that, given what we are seeing, these patterns. Yeah, I would think that someone sent him as an agent. I mean, the defense contractor definitely hired this guy, you can trust him. And then Jeffrey Epstein is actually working on behalf of who? Maybe not your company, maybe not America at all. These financial crimes, this pattern, Robert Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, we are seeing it's very clear they're robbing the piggy bank. The people that suffer are the people whose pensions it was when Robert Maxwell robbed the pension funds of the Mirror Group. In America, the same thing. You know, when these Bernie Madoff scams, and they say, "Oh, the money's all gone, and your entire savings has been depleted, but you know, you're just gonna have to work harder." I think we can probably stop there in the Jeffrey Epstein story, because next we need to get into his mysterious relationship with Leslie Wexner, because it's a very odd relationship. And I have to tell you, we are not really privy to much since they're locking everything down. But years later, when Jeffrey is actually being deposed related to his crimes with minors, it is interesting to hear and to think about the questions that the prosecutor is asking him throughout the deposition. Take a listen to this clip of Jeffrey Epstein being deposed.
Do you consider yourself to be bisexual? No. Okay. In any event, you did develop a sexual relationship with Leslie Wexner at some point in time. Is that true? No. Mr. Epstein, how long have you been sexually attracted to underage minor females?
Objection, harassing, argumentative.
Are you kidding? No, I mean, I don't feel like I'm divulging any secrets here, right?
Move to strike.
Mr. Epstein, were you sexually abused as a minor?
Wait, again?
Were you sexually abused as a minor?
You know, I'd like to respond to all your, if any, questions seem to be relevant, but I would like to respond to any relevant question at this time. However, my attorneys have counseled me that I cannot provide answers to the questions relevant to this lawsuit today. I must accept their advice or risk losing my Sixth Amendment right to effective representation. Accordingly, then, I assert my Fifth, Sixth, and 14th Amendment right to the United States Constitution.
Now, of course, it is a legal strategy, especially when you know they're cooking up that he's just going to sign a plea deal and get away with it and then just be running the sheriff's office in Miami. It is a strategy to say, just plead the Fifth about everything. But if my lawyer said plead the Fifth about everything and some questions were just so absurd, like, okay, no, obviously. But why? What made the prosecution ask him whether or not he had a sexual relationship with Lex Wexner? What did they know? What became apparent when they were looking before them and they were trying to charge him, and then somebody comes in, the hand of Midas, and says, leave that guy alone. He's ours. What made them ask that question? It's a very specific question. Do you have a sexual relationship with Lex Wexner? It's a very specific question to ask him whether or not he was molested in his youth. Oh, that's very interesting. And there's a lot more that we have to unpack. But I wanted to leave time today to take a look at what could possibly be motivating Trump in this moment, because it is very, very relevant, I think, to consider that question. All right, so who is Trump protecting? You have to wonder. I don't believe, and I know that some of you guys were in the comments, you're really mad at me about this, by the way. I said, I don't believe that Trump is in the Epstein files. You're like, Candace, come on. He's obviously in the Epstein files. And I maintain, I am being genuine with you when I say that I really do not think that Trump is in these files in a way that he's nervous about coming out. I just don't see that. I do believe, however, that he could be motivated to protect someone else that is, or to protect somebody else who would be implicated by this blackmail scandal. He definitely is somebody that I think would move mountains to protect his children. And I would almost say, especially Ivanka. I don't think Ivanka Trump is in the files. I don't think that she's caught on camera doing anything. But there is something about this story of Jared Kushner and Ivanka that is now making me uncomfortable. And what I'll tell you is that throughout the first term, and I was very much around them, and I will say this, Jared and Ivanka are lovely people. They are very kind, and I'm not covering them to pretend that they've ever done anything wrong that I know about. But I think it made a lot of people in the MAGA movement uncomfortable that Jared was so intimately involved, right? He was the person that had Trump's ear, right? There is the king, and then there is the person who whispers into the king's ear. The king's advisor holds a lot of power. There are books about that, this is who the president was. This is who actually held the power. I think it's called like Friends of the President, or All the President's Friends. I can't remember the book. But anyways, Jared was that person. Everybody knew that if you wanted to get something done, you went through Jared. Okay, Jared was running the White House the first term. He just was. And his demeanor is such that when he was doing it, he was doing a very good job because everybody likes Jared, which is to say that he doesn't ruffle any feathers in the process. And what I think bothered me was Jared had so much power and he got a lot done that he wanted through President Trump. But then when Jared left his post at the White House, suddenly we learn that Saudi Arabia injects $2 billion into his fund. Okay, this is a headline in the Wall Street Journal. Jared Kushner's new fund plans to invest Saudi money in Israel. Okay. And the small print there reads, the fine print, Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund committed $2 billion to Mr. Kushner's affinity partners, that's the name of his fund, agreeing to allow investment in Israeli firms for the first time. So that happens as soon as he leaves the White House. And then you go, okay, your father is running again, and Ivanka's nowhere to be seen. When I say nowhere to be seen, I mean that even in the lead up, okay, that's fine. You say you want to leave politics and that was the official story. You just want to spend time with your family. But she was so unaffected by the 2024 race that she didn't even dedicate a post to like voting on the night of the election. I'm not kidding. The night before the election, I don't know if you guys remember this, Ivanka took to X while everyone's worried about whether or not we're going to have a country. Like, you know, the panic that you feel when you're a citizen, and it matters who's going to lead this country. Like, it actually matters. So whether you were hoping for Kamala, I certainly wasn't, or whether you're hoping for Trump, the idea that the other person could win, people had anxiety. I had anxiety about the future for my children. I was like, we may not have a country in 4 years. But not Ivanka. She didn't even say like, hey, I'm going to stay out of it, but vote who you want to vote. She did a birthday tribute to herself. She did. The night before, she had a birthday. This was the post the night before the election. And she wrote, this past week, I turned 43. So it wasn't even like it was her birthday eve. It was like the week before she turned 43. And then she wrote, reflecting on life's lessons, here are some truths that I've learned along the way. 1, family and friends are everything. 2, forgive people. It frees you. 3, everyone's a teacher. 4, avoid lashon hara, which is gossip. 5, trust yourself. 6, nourish your body. 7, get sunshine. I'm like, wow, that's nice. That's nice. The night before, like, that's what's concerning you. We're all on edge. We're all biting our nails off here. And she's, you know, like she's on Zanga from the 2000s, you know, like she's coming up with these quotes that you put on your AIM profile when you're away. You know, you just discovered quotes.com and you got to make a AIM away message, or make a profile because you just broke up with your boyfriend when you're 13. It just missed the mark, you know? And then I realized, wow, this means that she is not impacted one way or the other. It means that they have classed into that part of society where elections don't matter because your family's good. Your family is good either way. And I had that thought. I said, well, yeah, Jared just got $2 billion. Now you guys are gone. You don't even care about whether or not you don't even care if your father wins this election. You're not even saying go vote. There's nothing. There was no work that was done. And so regarding the money, they would think after being in the office and speaking to your father-in-law that maybe that money would be coming to America in a big way. Well, Forbes did a deep dive on where that money was going. This was the headline. It was why Jared Kushner will become a billionaire no matter who wins. That was the energy that I got from her post. Doesn't matter. And in that article, it tells us, quote, Affinity had a slow start, deploying almost no capital in its first year while Kushner learned the ropes and navigated a turbulent pandemic market. But it's since picked up the pace and has now invested about $1.6 billion in at least 8 firms in Brazil, Germany, Israel, the US and UK, and the UAE, in industries ranging from finance to energy. Its most notable investments so far are the ones that it made in Israel. In September of 2023, Affinity announced a $110 million deal for a 15% stake in the automotive and credit business of the conglomerate Shlomo Group. It was the first ever known investment by Saudi and Qatari wealth funds in Israel. I'm just going to LOL that because I'm funded by Qatar. Okay, take down Candace Owens. It's just like Israel does deals with Qatar the whole time. That's the point here. They say it's significant because neither Gulf state has diplomatic relations with Jerusalem, and Kushner had to obtain waivers from both governments to make that happen. So he is acting as an intermediary between Qatar and Israel and getting this deal done, right? While the rest of us are being accused of being funded by Qatar for some reason, I guess this is fine. Like the Zionists are fine with this. The Shlomo deal, it tells us, was closed in January, and 6 months later, Affinity bought some $130 million in shares of the publicly traded Israeli financial services from Phoenix Financial. And this is what Jared had to say about that. He said, quote, it's only brought me closer with my investors. The fact that I'm investing Gulf money into Israel post October 7th, that's very important. We need to bring everyone together, he said. Okay, I really do wish that money was being invested in America, again, because you used the office to facilitate deals that would help you and your family. Of course you did that. But what's also striking is Jared's post, because then you wonder, okay, what is his vision after October 7th? We know what it is because really just a few months after October 7th, Jared was on the stage at Harvard, of course, and he had this to say about October 7th. Again, just a couple of months after, nobody knew what was going to happen. We were told they were just going to quick military response in Gaza. Now we realize it's an ethnic cleansing. They are intentionally it's a demolition. It's just a controlled demolition, essentially, is what we're looking at. They're demolishing everything in sight. And this is what Jared Kushner had to say on stage at Harvard just a couple of months after. He apparently maybe saw that demolition before the rest of us. Take a listen.
I think that both sides are spending a fortune on military. I think neither side really wants to have, a terrorist organization enclaved right between them. I mean, Gaza's waterfront property. It could be very valuable to, if people would focus on kind of building up, livelihoods. You think about all the money that's gone into this tunnel network and into all the munitions. If that would have gone into education or innovation, what could have been done? And so I think that it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there. But I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up.
That's like very nice way of saying ethnically cleanse the region, clean it up, and then we've got some valuable property. We've got some valuable waterfront property. And then we know Trump's then talking about building Trump hotels, and it really, really makes you wonder. Okay, that was February 15th, 2024. And he already had a real estate vision for people being moved out of Gaza. So we go back to our indicators, right? Our indicators. Do we have that, guys, from the beginning? We were talking about this. Identity laundering, the Midas touch, sexual deviancy, theater, historical revisionism. And regarding the Midas touch, apparently it has been reported, and this was not a political report, by the way. This was done in 2006, before Jared Kushner was in the public domain. There was this guy who said that, yeah, Jared Kushner got into Harvard because of this Midas touch. They were saying that he did not have the grades to get into Harvard. And I'll tell you about this guy. This guy's Dan Golden. He wrote a book back in 2006 called The Price of Admission. He was investigating at that time, again, not related to politics left or right. He just thought it was interesting that there were so many of these people going to Harvard that were underqualified. He was investigating why so many of the elite children get into Harvard, despite not having the academics to do so. And Jared Kushner came up in his investigation naturally. And according to him in his research, he writes, quote, New Jersey real estate developer Charles Kushner, that's Jared's father, we're going to talk about him in a second, had pledged $2.5 million to Harvard University in 1998, not long before, his son Jared was admitted to the prestigious Ivy League school. At the time, Harvard accepted about 1 of every 9 applicants, he writes. He then went out and spoke to the former administrators of Jared's high school about this peculiarity. You decide to donate before your son is, deciding that he wants to go there. He's about to apply. And he tracked down a former administrator of Jared's high school, that's a Frisch school. And in his book, he quotes the administrator as having said, quote, there was no way anybody in the administrative office of the school thought that he would, on the merits, get into Harvard. That's a former official, again, of the Frisch School in Paramus, New Jersey. The administrator goes on to say, quote, his GPA did not warrant it. His SAT scores did not warrant it. We thought for sure there was no way this was going to happen. Then lo and behold, Jared was accepted. Okay. So Charles Kushner, then he does more work, discovers that he is on the board of something at Harvard or on some commission at Harvard along with his wife, and that they were allowed to be on that commission despite the fact that by then he had already been found guilty of financial crimes. And so what are we looking at here? Again, it's one of these stories. We came from Russia and then suddenly we had millions of dollars within a couple of months. Just hard work pays off, man. What can I tell you? We just worked really hard. Fortune. That's the Kushner family story. It's an interesting one. And when you talk about sexual deviancy and blackmail, I am really questioning why on earth Trump thought it was appropriate to name Charles Kushner as the ambassador, after granting him a pardon, as the ambassador to, of course, France. Because what do we know for a fact about Charles Kushner? Well, we know that when he went to prison, It was for tax evasion and for witness tampering. And if you're wondering whether or not he was guilty and you don't know how disgusting this story is, the attorney general at the time who put him away was Chris Christie, attorney general of New Jersey. And I never knew the backstory of that, of what Charles Kushner did. And it is, I'm just going to let you listen to Chris Christie tell it because Margaret Hoover was questioning him on PBS's firing line. This is a journalist, Margaret Hoover. And she was asking Chris Christie about that time he put Charles Kushner into prison. Take a listen.
I was surprised that you didn't give yourself more of a defense for prosecuting Charles Kushner in the book.
I just think that it was so obvious he had to be prosecuted that, I mean, if a guy hires a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law and videotapes it and then sends the videotape to his sister to attempt to intimidate her from testifying before a grand jury, do I really need any more justification than that? I mean, it's one of the most loathsome, disgusting crimes that I prosecuted when I was U.S. attorney. And I was U.S. attorney in New Jersey, Margaret, so we had some loathsome and disgusting crime going on there. But I just laid out the facts, and any objective person who looks at the facts knows, confronted with those facts, I had a moral and an ethical obligation to bring that prosecution.
Like, I know a lot of people have beef in their family. Like, we got family issues. Everybody got family issues. This is not your regular family issue. Could you imagine this? Your sibling is getting in trouble for tax evasion. You have information that the government wants pertaining, so they want to make you a witness. To stop you from being a witness, your brother goes to your husband, decides to hire a prostitute to seduce him, and video records your husband having sex with a prostitute. And then once he gets that recording, he goes to you and threatens you with it. I am speechless. More speechless that Trump granted him a pardon. And not only granted him a pardon, that's one thing, okay? You want to do favors? That's what pardons are all about at the end of your presidency anyway. Like, everyone does it by left and right. So, like, everybody's guilty for doing this. There's no one side is better than the other. They look out for their homies in the end. But to then give him the ambassadorship of France? Maybe he was overqualified for that, actually. Sexual deviancy. Maybe he was overly qualified for that position, but it makes you wonder why he wanted it. Why somebody that's in their 70s wants, and I don't know if he speaks French, maybe he does. Why would he want to be the ambassador of France? What are the perks of being an ambassador? Well, you become an intermediary. I think that's some of the perks. But these questions should be asked now because it seems like we have been completely played, and we are being played over something as sinister as crimes against children. We're being called stupid, right? We're being called weaklings for saying, excuse me, there's not just smoke here, there is fire. And I don't like it. I don't like Jared's involvement in the Middle East. I think it's a conflict of interest at best for Trump right now, that of what Ivanka and Jared are up to, their path to becoming billionaires is a conflict of interest at best. Who are they more loyal to? Who is Trump more loyal to? Are Ivanka and Jared more loyal to Israel? Is Trump therefore more loyal to his child, Ivanka, than he is to the United States? Are these fair questions? I think they are. Okay? Because now you're gaslighting us, and we're going to continue to ask these questions. Anyways, I'm wondering what you guys think about all of that. There is no stone that I will leave unturned when it comes to harming children. This was the red line, and it is absolutely foolish for Trump to think that he can redirect the energy of MAGA somewhere else and tell us, oh no, don't look over there. All right, guys, what are you thinking? Because I'm thinking a lot. I don't like it at all. Just not feeling this version of Trump at all. And I'm not going to shy away from saying that at all. I really am not. We have ST, who writes in the comments, Candace, I admire your courage, truly world-class journalism. No man dares to publicly talk about this. Yeah, well, you can see why. You look at their lives, what has happened to people. The problem is that if we all stay quiet, then we're never going to reach critical mass. And I think we have finally reached critical mass on the topic of Israel. And that's why they're starting to pass these speech laws, especially first and foremost at Harvard. Looking now at Trump, the involvement of what his administration did at Harvard, why is that? Why was Harvard so central to it? Oh, this is what we're doing. We are redefining anti-Semitism, exactly the same woke crap that was happening when the left had power, but they were doing it under racism. This is speech laws, okay? I don't care if you're offended because you're black or because you're Jewish or because whatever it is you think you are that makes you special. Okay, you're not special. You can deal with speech. If you need to go home and cry, you can do that. But you don't get to threaten our speech because you think you're untouchable. That's ridiculous. Again, Harvard, the Midas touch. They all go through Harvard. I'm telling you, I know a lot of idiots that went through Harvard. It never made sense to me. Unless it's an operation, unless it's an op running through there. Just leaving that out there. Radisson writes, Muslim man here, born and raised American. Just want to know how awesome, want you to know how awesome you are and let you know how many Muslims around the world appreciate everything that you do. Thank you. I mean, there is so much to unpack with this, by deception, thou wilt do war, especially, of course, in the Middle East. I think Israel has caused a lot of the problems in the Middle East. I mean, what's happening right now today, we didn't even get to this. Syria, they're bombing Damascus. It was Bibi Netanyahu that funded the terrorists. So when you see these stories now, again, they're wiping history yesterday. Go look. Bibi Netanyahu funded al-Nusrat in Syria. He is the reason he toppled Assad's government. They were protecting Christians. Now Zionists are going, look what's happening. Christians are dying in Syria. Yeah, at the behest of Bibi Netanyahu. Who is ISIS? Is anybody still buying that's Muslims? Anybody really not buying that's the CIA and the Mossad? Is anybody not naturally asking those questions now, given the fact that ISIS never attacks Israel? It doesn't make, in fact, everyone they attack, it's exactly, for whatever reason, it helps out Israel at any given time. And yes, al-Nusrat, which was initially, it's basically an arm of al-Qaeda in Syria. I talked about this with Scott Horton. We had hours on this. He really is the expert on this. We talked about what was going on in Syria. That is Bibi Netanyahu. He toppled Assad. They keep telling you that these people that they are toppling are the murderous, insane people. We knew what was going to happen. The second they toppled Assad, Israel moved their borders. And they're doing everything a lot faster now, all around, whether it's in Lebanon, Syria. They are getting crazy. And it's very clear this is all part of a plan. Okay, this did not happen because of October 7th. This was a plan, and Bibi Netanyahu is executing it. That is my opinion. And I'm going to state it while it's still safe to do so in this country. CA writes, how much do you think the information that Trump has on his hand is worth? 0 if released. Millions or billions if kept secret. His billionaire friends will be happy to pay up for him to keep quiet. Yeah, no, I don't think, I think it implicates Israel. It's that simple. And in order for his future generation of wealth, billionaires that will are passing the mantle, Ivanka and his family, if they're invested, as I believe they are, they clearly are, in Israel, then you don't want Israel to go out of fashion, to go out of American fashion. It's that simple. I think that's the most obvious answer. At the end of the day, he is a businessman, right? That's what Trump has always been, a businessman. He likes deals. Again, I'm surmising here, but these are fair questions to ask, given the fact that he's now resulted into calling his base stupid. So I'm going to ask those questions. New Safar writes, Candace, identity laundering lets elites rewrite the truth, just like they buried Epstein's client list. Same playbook, erase the past, control the narrative. When will we demand receipts from the untouchables? We're doing it now. We're demanding it now. We're having these conversations now, openly. This is what I am committing my time to because it is so much deeper than you guys even realize. And as we get further along this series, you are going to realize that nothing that we have been told, we are quite literally living in a matrix. We're living in a matrix, and the same people have had power. They have stolen, plundered. They made you think that they're naturally successful. They've all had the hand of Midas on them. They've stolen from us. I mean, really think deeply. I want to leave you on a philosophical point here, but I want you to think deeply about what it means if people that are underqualified just have a hand of Midas on them in life, and they are getting, fake credentials at universities. So while the rest of us are trying to, maybe we'll get a student loan, and then we're putting ourselves into debt. These people are getting into these schools and they're underqualified, and then they're getting into companies to work for, and they're underqualified because what are these people at the end of the day? They're actors. Okay, this is theater. So we're competing, and there's no way we can break into the elite class because they're all acting. That would make us what? Think about that philosophically. It makes us slaves. Okay, it's a new form of slavery. It's a modern plantation. Same owners, same exact owners of the plantations. And they have us throwing ourselves into debt, credit card debt, this, that. Then there's these financial crises. They're dumbing us down, putting us through the public schools while they have their own special programs in schools that they get to go through. making us stupid, arguing about dumb issues, and they're not losing any power. They're not losing any sleep. They don't even care who's going to win for presidency. They're like, whatever. That's what a matrix is. It's all fake. It's literally all fake. And that is what the Epstein story threatens. You pull the fabric there, and it implicates so many countries, and you realize that none of these characters are real. These characters are just being inserted into places to serve Israel. That makes Israel the master of the universe. And that's troubling, because this is a state that has a hexagram on their flag, okay? They're even lying about the history of the Star of David. It's a hexagram. It's a cult. You can't just wipe that away. It's not even a long time ago. There's tons of books. It's showing you that that's a hexagram. What do you pretend? It's a cultic. You start looking into Aleister Crowley, who had the Star of David on his books, right? He was a committed occultist. He established a religion that believed in sex magic, talking about like sexual deviancy and things of that nature. Aleister Crowley, the things that they believed in. Yeah, you're just already trying to wipe history. Like, nope, that's not. That is a religious. No, it's a hexagram. Okay, we're not stupid. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. I could rant about the lies that nation has told. I mean, not even that. The Star of David used to be the flag of Morocco. Okay, why? That's weird. It's not a Jewish state. Why? What was going on in Morocco? What was going on in Algeria and Tunisia and Morocco? Andre Gide. We'll get to all of that. Aleister Crowley. What were they doing there? Initiations. Why would they put their hexagram in those countries? Anyways, let me stop, because I'm going way too deep on this. And for those of you that don't know, somebody just gave money and said all roads lead to the occult. Yes, it is an occult nation. There's no question about that. Everything that they are involved in is occult. And that's why we have to sort of wake the world up to this very quickly, because they have a lot of power. And the only way that we are going to be able to fight this is by being willing to tell the truth. For those of you that would like to support my work as a journalist, you can head to the website. I do not have a hand of Midas on me, unfortunately. And you can purchase some merch. You can sign up. Yeah, we have new merch. You can also sign up for the Shot in the Dark series. You can join our book club. Next Tuesday is our next meeting, where we finish Hollywood Babylon, which we also learned Aleister Crowley, the occult, they established Hollywood as well. And yeah, we believe what we see on their movies is history. That is a part of rewriting history, running Hollywood, not making people believe that these actors and actresses were just so talented, but they're actually coming up through their special schools. These people are trained. They are trained. Your world, I hate to make it come crashing down. It is a carefully woven illusion, but it's okay, because it should be all crashing down, right? Because then we get to go back to the beginning and recognize what is real and what is fake. What is real? I see what I did there. Anyways, we will see you guys on Monday.